Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, April the 22nd, 2021. It is currently 11:28 a.m. Central Time. And yes, I know it's Thursday, and typically on Thursday I take the day off, but I decided to drive here to the church on this Thursday morning, cold, misty Thursday morning here in West Texas. And I decided to drive back out here to the church to do, I don't know how many live broadcasts I'm going to do, but I thought I would come out here and talk about some things that I think are interesting. Maybe, I don't know. I don't even know which direction today is going to go, but I am here. And typically I'm here on a Thursday. This is how you can kind of judge things, all right? If I show up on a Monday, that's probably because I wasn't happy the way Sunday went. So I come back on a Monday trying to get rid of what I felt went bad and try to do something to kind of just cover up the bad that happened on Sunday. And if I'm here on a Thursday, that means I probably wasn't happy with the way Wednesday went. And if you'll start realizing a pattern, I'm never happy with the way anything went. But here I am. I'm once again in front of the microphone, behind the microphone. And if you're listening to us live, feel free to jump in, say good morning, say hello using the Spreaker app. Just hit the little chat icon. If you're not listening to us live and you would like to listen to us live, it's very simple. Email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Say, I would like to listen to the live broadcast. We'll send you the link to the app. It's absolutely free. It doesn't cost you a dime. And you can, use that app to listen to everything that we do on demand or to listen to us when we're actually live on the air. So feel free to do that if you so desire. All right. Yeah, it's there. It's there for you. There's a lot of things I would like to talk about, but let's talk about this. If you are a member of the Theology Central Book Club, which of course you should be, but if you are a member of the Theology Central Book Club, sometime last night, you probably got a notification and you probably looked at that notification going, wait, why did he add that book? What is he doing? Why is he adding a book like that? And I'm here this morning to try to explain to you why I added that book. But for me to explain this, we have to go back in time. We have to go back to the 1990s. Offutt Air Force Base. It's listed as being in Omaha, Nebraska. It's actually located in Bellevue, Nebraska, but Offutt Air Force Base, Bellevue, Nebraska. It's about midnight. I'm security forces there at Offutt Air Force Base. I'm security forces. I have my M16. I have my beret on. I'm there. I think at that time I was in a mobile unit. We were to patrol different parts of the flight line and certain aircraft that had to be protected because of classified material being on those aircraft. And so I think we were in a mobile unit. So what we did is we there were certain areas we checked, and then there were basically other people who were in stationary basically areas that they stayed in one place to watch something or to guard something. We would come by and check them, or we would there were two of us in the mobile unit. One of us would get out and then relieve that so that person could go grab food or go to the restroom or whatever the case may be. So here I am. I'm with a new partner. I had never been with this partner in our mobile patrol, and it's getting close to midnight. And he's like, "Oh, you know what it's time for?" And I'm like, "No, I don't." He's like, "It's time for Coast to Coast AM." I'm like, "What? What's Coast to Coast AM?" He's like, "It is the best overnight radio program you'll ever listen to." I'm like, "Okay, I'm ready. So he turns it on. The host of the program was a man by the name of Art Bell. And for the next 4 hours, and now there were times we got interrupted in those 4 hours, but we sat there inside this, inside the truck that we were in. It was basically like an SUV, security forces vehicle. As we sat there in the darkness of part of the end of the runway of the flight line there at Offutt Air Force Base, is where we're sitting there in this dark vehicle. I started listening to Art Bell and realized this is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. It was 4 hours of UFOs, aliens, paranormal, ghost, conspiracy theories. It was the craziest thing I had ever heard. And I was like, this is awesome. Not that I believed it all, but I thought it was just so crazy that here's this radio program that airs from basically midnight to 4 a.m. talking about the craziest things. I was like, there was no subject they were afraid to talk about. And basically Art Bell's approach was, okay, that's your idea, that's your theory. He just asked the questions to get the information out of you. He wasn't trying to debate you. There was no debating. There was no arguing. It was like, these are your ideas. You present them. And then the listener basically gets to decide. It wasn't yelling and screaming and debating and arguing. It was just exploring some of the craziest ideas and theories that you can't even imagine the things that were discussed on the program. It was crazy, but it was addictive and fascinating. And that's when I became a lifelong fan of the program, Coast to Coast AM. And Art Bell was the host for a long time, and then he left, and we could go through the whole history of the program. But the program, obviously, at that point, radio was still very dominant. And for I don't know how many years, it was the number one overnight radio program in the United States of America. I mean, millions of people tuned in every night, that overnight time listening. And I had lots of jobs in the military where, I worked overnight, and I would make sure I had a radio and I would tune in. And I remember when I wasn't in the mobile unit, if I got placed on what was called a whiskey post, basically a stationary unit, literally somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, basically your job was to sit in this little shed. That's the only way I can describe it. This little tiny building, and you're just supposed to watch a line of fence of the perimeter of the Air Force Base. You're just to watch that, making sure no one came across it. And you just sat there in this little building by yourself for 12 hours in the middle of nowhere. So I would bring the radio, and from midnight to 4 a.m., sitting there in the darkness of the whiskey post, listening to Coast AM, night after night after night. Loved it. Crazy. Well, now, obviously, technology, things have changed. The radio program still exists. It still airs on radio stations around the country. But now they have a subscription service where you pay like $6, and then you can download their app, and then you have access. You can listen to them live when they're live, or you can listen to all the programs on demand, and you have access to their archive of programs dating back to I don't even know how far back, and you can listen to all of them, and they give you all the crazy, bizarre news articles, and it's just all right there in one place. So every once in a while, I usually once or twice a year, I'll subscribe for a month or two just to kind of catch up and find out what's going on in the world of Coast to Coast AM. So guess what? Late last night, I decided, you know what? It's been a long time. Let's do it. Let's resubscribe to Coast AM, and let's see what's going on. And I turned it on, and guess what? I'm laying there in the darkness of my room. Guess what I hear? A discussion about a new book. And that new book, the subject of that new book, is a new vision of Jesus. And I'm like, okay, pay attention to this. We got a new book. Now, come to find out, the book is not as new as I first thought. I think it came out in January of this year, so it's not that new. Maybe in book terms, that's still relatively new. I don't know. In music, that would be considered old. Maybe in the book world, I was talking to one of my friends who has a YouTube book channel, and he was like, older. It's a little different in the book world than in the music world. The music world, that album is new for like 2 days, and then it's considered old. So maybe a book from January of 2021 is not considered old, but it was being talked about. Coast to Coast AM. I don't know how many people subscribe. I don't know how many people listen to them live. Used to be a major, it had a big influence on a lot of people who listen to Coast AM. But here it is. They're talking about a new book dealing with Jesus, and it's a new vision of Jesus. And I was like, okay, let me get some information. So as soon as I got the name of the book, I just immediately added it to the Theology Central Book Club. One, that's where I could easily find it later. Two, to let everyone know that it exists. Now, I am not telling you that this is a theologically sound book on Jesus. It is not. It is definitely not a theologically sound book on Jesus. It's not a biblical-based book on Jesus. In fact, it sounds like one of the major sources where they get some of their information is from you may have heard of it, the Gospel of Thomas. And I'll give you a little background on that in a minute. So here's what we're going to do. Coast to Coast AM, the only way to hear the full program is to subscribe. So I didn't want to take anything from their subscription service because of copyright, concerns. But they do release every day a best of podcast edition of the program. Now, it's kind of ridiculous that they don't just put the radio program out now as a full podcast. I really don't know why they don't do that. Everyone has moved to that. Glenn Beck, even Rush Limbaugh before he passed away had done that. Everyone has moved to that model. But for some reason, Coast to Coast still thinks it's 1997. I don't know what they think it is. It's really weird. But they released this best of, and it's usually like a 17, 20-minute, condensed kind of overview of what was discussed the night before. All right. So I don't know. To me, it really serves as an advertisement. Hey, this is what you missed on Coast to Coast AM. You know what you should do. You should probably subscribe so you could get the full program or tune in overnight. So it's kind of, I don't like the way they do that, but because I can grab that and not have to worry about copyright issues because it's not behind a paywall, then I thought I would grab it and just play a little bit of their kind of overview of what was discussed, just so that you can get kind of an idea of what was discussed. And listen, anytime Coast to Coast AM talks about religion, which they do a lot, they'll talk about hell, demonic possession, exorcisms, Jesus, it's always crazy, so far gone. I mean, it leaves any framework of historical biblical Christianity. And you could say, well, then why even worry about it? Why even care? Why even give it any attention? Because see, here's the thing that people have to understand. This is so important. Sometimes Christians really have this mindset that, that everyone out there in the world, that they don't really care about the things of God. They don't understand the things of God. And it's almost like forget them when they talk about it. But no, there are people out there who have lots of questions about the Bible and about Jesus. They are curious. They just don't want to talk to Christians. They don't want to talk to anyone related to a church. They don't want to talk to any of those people, but they are curious. So there's people at midnight, 1 a.m, can't sleep, listening to Coast AM and hear about a book that's about Jesus. And they're like, oh, I've got a lot of questions about Jesus. And guess what? It's not being promoted by a church, not by a Christian podcast, not by a pastor. So they'll pick up that book and read it and get their ideas about Jesus because they feel like that they can explore some of their questions and their curiosity without having to deal with what they feel like the judgmental world of Christianity, which, let's be honest, Christians were like, oh no, that's wrong. That's heresy. And we do have to call heresy. By no means am I saying we ever stop doing that. We have to condemn heresy and false teaching. But sometimes when we're dealing with lost people, what we have to do is try to say, oh, so you're curious about Jesus. You got questions. Let them ask those questions. Let them throw out some theories and then just try to say, well, let me offer some, have you ever read the Bible? How about we explore certain passages of the Bible and let's see what you think. Instead of coming at it going, this is the way you must think. How about going, oh, so you're curious. Well, let's explore together. Now, you've already made up your mind, but if they can come to you and feel like that they can ask these questions and throw out their crazy theories and you will listen and explore with them, I'm not saying it's a guarantee you're going to get, because ultimately salvation, I believe, is a sovereign work of God. So there's no ultimate guarantee how it will play out. But maybe you can be there to help kind of guide them back to a more biblical understanding. All right. I think we have a perception that people aren't as interested in spiritual things as they are. I think a lot of research in how much people search for religious topics and ideas on, say, Google. Those Google analytics seem to show that there's a lot of people out there searching for religious ideas and information. During the height of the COVID situation, Bible sales were going through the roof because a lot of people are like, well, I don't know what else to do. I've never read the Bible. Let me read the Bible. I've seen on Reddit many times entire situations where people go on Reddit and go, hey, I'm going to start reading the Bible and I don't know where to begin and I'm confused about this. That's where we need to be there to go, hey, you can talk to us as well. You can talk to us. But in many cases, people are more willing to listen to what is being said about Jesus on Coast to Coast AM than what is being said about Jesus on the local Christian radio station. So whenever I hear discussions like this, I'm always like, okay, let's listen to what they have to say and let's consider it. Now, again, I put the book there for you because you need to know a book you need to know, if I can speak correctly, you need to know a book like that is out there, that I don't know how many copies it will sell, but you need to be aware of it because if you meet someone who's reading it, I don't want you to go after them going, that book's not biblical. That book's not Christian. Say, so what do you think? What did you learn about Jesus? What do you think? And ask questions and get them in a conversation and then try to get them over to maybe a more theologically sound understanding of Christ and get them into maybe, how about this passage of the Bible? What about this section of Scripture? So, so whenever this happens within culture, I think we need to talk about it. It's interesting that they did a program about it. It's interesting they did a program. Was it last night or the night before? I may have been listening to the archive. So it's aired within the last few nights. It is interesting that it aired then because you would think that they would have done it closer to around Easter time because that's usually when the world will have all kinds of programs about Jesus. The History Channel, Discovery Channel, what ABC will be showing the 10 Commandments. That's kind of typically what happens within culture. So it was kind of weird timing in some ways, but it's being talked about. So I wanted to bring it to your attention. The book is there. If you're a member of the Theology Central Book Club, you can look at it. You can get all the information. I'm going to give you some information about the book in a minute. So I just wanted you to know what's going on. I mean, that's one of my jobs here is to inform you. And so, just learn how to try to find a way to you want to be the Christian that people will come to ask you spiritual questions, to ask you questions about the Bible. You want to be that person. I guess for me, I usually had, and I think this is what confuses some Christians, with the lost world, atheists, agnostics, people who just had all kinds of doubts and questions. They usually felt very comfortable with me and all of the years I was in the military to talk to me, to ask questions. The people I usually did not get along with were usually professing Christians. Those are usually the people that did not want to talk to me and I didn't get along with very well, which is very frustrating. But because I always felt that we can get a whole discussion why. Because it's just, you expect, I guess this is, let me state it this way. You expect lost people not to know. You expect lost people to be confused. You expect lost people to believe some really whacked out and crazy things. But when you have fellow believers who claim to be Christians, who clearly don't understand anything about the Bible, don't understand anything about the history of Christianity, doctrine, theology, church history, they don't understand anything. The difference with the fellow Christians who don't understand anything is they always want to argue and debate you like they know everything. I typically found more humility in dealing with lost people than I did with fellow Christians who all they ever want to do is argue. It's like you say up, they say down. You say A, they say B. You say C, they say D. You say Jesus, they say no. You say theology, they say no. And it's like, why is it always going to be Christians who want to argue about every literal thing? It just drives you mad. It's like you can't discuss. It's always like, nope, this is the way it is. Nope, this is the way it is. And it's like, man. And it just drives you crazy. It's almost like this is the way I felt. The lost people respected all of my degrees in theology than the Christians did. The Christians did not respect it. They didn't care. They could care less. Because they know just as much as anyone who's got 4 degrees from different seminaries. They don't care, 7 degrees. It didn't matter. And at that, I always am fascinated by that. Why is it that the world sometimes they're more humble and go, I don't really know a lot about this, but I've got some questions. And Christians are like, I know everything. I know it all. I know everything. You're like, okay, all right, never mind. Okay. And I think maybe that's why the lost people don't seek out Christians for this kind of information. They'll turn to Coast AM. They'll pick up a book about the new vision of Jesus, and they'll walk into an occult bookstore before they walk into a Christian bookstore. They'll walk into a secular bookstore before they walk into a Christian bookstore. Maybe, I don't know, maybe my perception is wrong. That's what I've experienced, and that's what I have seen. So when Coast to Coast talks about it, then I think we'll talk about it. So here, I have a clip. The audio is very low. I don't know why their audio is so low. I've got it cranked to 100, but here we go. We'll get kind of just a little idea of what they discussed. Here we go.
Now here's a highlight from Coast to Coast AM on iHeartRadio.
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Whitley Strieber with us. Whitley is the author of best-selling books Communion, Superstorm, and many others, The Greys. His titles, Wolfen, The Hunger, and Superstorm were made into films. Superstorm is The Day After Tomorrow that he wrote with Art Bell. His fiction series, Alien Hunter, was made into sci-fi series Hunters. And his recent books include Tonight, Jesus, A New Vision. Whitley, welcome back, my friend.
Hi, it's good to be back.
I have to tell you, I never thought I would see a book written on Jesus. Tell me about this.
Well, my wife Ann was very interested in Jesus, and she spent a lifetime of study, and I just decided to take some of that effort and make it into a book, because I learned a lot from her. And then after, I guess about a year and a half ago, I came across a book about the shroud, and I had believed that the shroud was a fake, that it was made in the Middle Ages by Leonardo da Vinci or somebody. And I was astonished to find that there had been a lot of really serious scientific research done on the shroud since the 1988 debunking.
Right.
That shows that it is something, it's really the strangest thing in the world. It is, in fact, the strangest article in the world. The book I was referring to was by an author called Mark Antonacci.
Yes, he's been on the show before.
Yeah, well, you see, I mean, I read it very carefully, and I thought to myself, if this is true, then I want to really get into this. And Anne had always said that the story of Jesus isn't understood.
She was right, I think.
Yeah, she was. And
now stop right there. So the idea here is that the story of Jesus is not understood correctly. It's greatly misunderstood. The story of Jesus is greatly misunderstood. That is the idea. So the concept basically is all the Christians, and now they're not being maybe as explicit with this, but this is the idea that kind of comes across. Christians have misunderstood Jesus. We've kind of misrepresented Jesus. So we need to get to the true story of Jesus. We need a new vision of Jesus, which is actually a correct vision of Jesus, because the church and Christians have so messed up the vision of Jesus, so we cannot see him clearly, that the church has done that. Now, you could argue that there is at least a bit of truth to that, because I believe that Christianity, I've talked about the political hijacking. The political hijacking has recreated a Christianity into the image of patriotism and turning Jesus almost into a pro-American constitutional Republican that it is at times kind of frightening what Christianity has done to Christ. But the answer isn't to go to non-biblical sources to find out who Jesus really was. The issue is to get back to actual scriptures and get back to a Christianity built on scripture, not a Christianity that seems to be built and defined by churchianity. So I do think that there's something here, but okay, so let's see where they go with this. And again, this is not the entire program. This is just some highlights that they're offering us here. All right, here we go.
So I thought to myself, okay, well, why isn't it? What have we missed? And that was the beginning of this book. That's why I started to write it.
Other than the birth of Jesus on Christmas Day, not a lot of people write about him as a child. You got into that. Tell me about that.
Nobody.
No.
It's not just not a lot of people. There's nobody. Well, I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this, I have to read the ancient authors. I have to read the canonical Gospels, which I knew very well anyway. They've been part of my life since forever. But I began to read the Apocrypha, and I read some of the church fathers. I read some of I began to read a lot of stuff. Eusebius, I could list a whole bunch of names that nobody will recognize, let me put it that way. And what began to emerge was that this was we're always sort of told that, well, the Gospels were written in very simple Greek, et cetera, and so forth. Well, that may be true, but they happen to be among the most sophisticated documents from the ancient world. And one of them in particular that's part of the Apocrypha that's been pushed aside is known as the Infancy Gospel of Jesus. And it is, in fact, the most extensive document about childhood that exists from the entire ancient world.
Did he do anything mystical as a child, Whitley?
Well, he certainly did a few things that were mischievous.
Yeah.
But here's what I found. It's basically a group of stories, essentially miracle stories about his childhood from the age of 5 to the age of 12, and where he turns some clay sparrows into real birds and pushes children off of roofs and then brings them back to life. And it's quite an involved story. But here's the thing. If you take the miracles out, you then have what would sound like a group of family stories about a very brilliant and angry child. Angry, who was growing up in a world that did not understand him at all, that he was so far beyond them that he was extremely frustrated. And then the infancy gospel leaps to life. And you realize, wait a minute, this has been dismissed because these miracles in it are so crazy. But if you take away those miracles, this is a really remarkable story of a little genius of extraordinary intelligence who was being stifled and frustrated by the world in which he lived.
Are you spiritual now, Whitley? Have you always been?
Oh, always, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I try to live for the good, and I live by love, compassion, and humility as best I can. This is my life. I would never be any other way. That's why, I could have become a big celebrity. I had that choice, but I made the choice to remain an ordinary man and to not become a big commentator on television, et cetera, and so forth. And it was a very conscious choice because I just don't think that life is a life I want to live. The life I want to live is a life that is devoted to a quiet pursuit of the truth and the good.
Well, with Whitley Strieber, his latest book is called Jesus, A New Vision, that just came out. And Whitley, let's talk a little bit about the soul before we get back more into the life of Jesus, because some think he was a magician. I don't think so, but I want to get your take on that. But what's your take on the soul?
We've gone soul blind. We are blind to the soul. Even those of us who say to ourselves, I believe I have a soul, deep down, we're blind. And what has blinded us is the rise of material civilization and the huge outpouring of wealth in the Western world, in the developed world. And it's hard to remain in contact with your own soul in a world that is so fixated on what's outside of you. We're always looking outside of ourselves for the next thing. We're even worse off because we're fixated on the internet. We're staring into our phones all the time. We're always looking outward. But inward, there is a much bigger world and a much more important one, and we don't look there. You have to come back into touch with your soul. And one of the things that happens to us is we say to ourselves, well, I don't want to really look at my conscience because I just don't want to go down that path. I'd rather just ignore that and pretend there's nothing to look at, nothing to see there. And we concentrate on the material world. I know very few people who take religion seriously. A lot of people still do, but the great majority simply don't. And if you go to Europe, it's just nobody, hardly anybody. And yet, we have to all make this journey through life. And the body dies and the soul goes on. And then what do you do? What have you made of your life? You have to think about that.
Do you believe in hell?
I am very close to my wife, who died in 2015.
Yes.
We wrote a book together after she died called Afterlife Revolution. And I asked her that, and I said, what happens to the evil? And she said, I think the most devastating thing I've ever heard. She said, nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
It surely can't be rewarded.
They are denied immortal life. What could be worse than that? That's hell, if there is a hell. The moment when you know you missed the mark forever.
And it ends.
That would be hell.
That's a good point. Now, some were saying that Jesus was a very clever magician. What do you think of that?
Well, that's an interesting word. I use that word in the book because that's very much how Jesus was thought of in his own time. The sense of that word has changed over the years. In Jesus' time, magicians, first of all, some of them, their magic worked, and we can talk about exactly why, and his certainly did. But they were reverenced. They weren't considered charlatans. Some of them were considered charlatans. But the real ones were much more popular than doctors, the conventional doctors, because the doctors, if you read the works of the Roman physician Galen, and you read some of his potions, you think, how could anybody live through drinking that? And the answer is they couldn't. But the cure was very often worse than the disease. But the magician had what we now call the placebo effect. effect, and we dismiss it. Oh, it's just the placebo effect. But in those days, someone who was convincing and had great personal authority could engage that effect very powerfully and could really cause what we would consider miracle cures routinely. We can't do it now because we understand it. Then in those days, they didn't understand it, and so it was more powerful. And he had tremendous authority and belief in himself, and he knew how to use it. So yes, he was a magician, and no, that wasn't a term of disrespect in those days at all.
You know, it's so amazing too, Whitley, over the ages. I mean, how many people get talked about as often as Jesus does in all ways? Nobody.
The literature on Jesus is the most extensive literature in the world.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I had a guest on during close to Easter who claims that Jesus did not die and resurrect, but merely was injured and then came back, and they hightailed him out of there.
Explaining away the resurrection is all well and good, and there are a million ways to do it. But the science is very clear. What happened to that garment, that shroud, is that it was irradiated by a burst of neutrons, and then it fell onto itself. There's no place those neutrons could have come from except that body. He turned into light in that tomb. That's what happened. People don't want to accept it. They don't want to look at it because then they have to look at themselves in ways we don't like to, like I was talking about earlier. But it happened. It happened.
What does that tell you? Let's make that great assumption. It did happen. What does that tell you about this person?
Well, it can tell you one thing that I don't think we should dwell on, and that is it can say, well, he was a divine being and therefore different from us. I think, and this is one of the main themes of my book, that it actually tells us something about ourselves that we don't want to face and don't want to look at. He was not saying, I'm different from you. His whole life was about saying, I am one of you. I am one of you. That means that you have the capacity, not necessarily the capacity to turn into a being of light, but certainly the capacity to preserve your soul and extend yourself into what Jesus called heaven.
Listen to more Coast to Coast AM every weeknight at 1 a.m. Eastern, and go to coasttocoastam.com for more.
For the ones who know.
There you have it. There is so much to unpack from that. I didn't want to keep interrupting it. I was getting worried because I think we're having some internet connection issues here out we're in a church in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes that happens. So as far as I can tell, we're still live on the air. Hopefully we are. I'm going to proceed as if we're live on the air. And then when all of this is done, if this doesn't upload properly, well, then I've had a good long discussion with myself. Okay. So I don't know if that will be of great value. It won't be of value to anybody else. Maybe I'll be able to get back in my car going, well, that was a good time of talking to yourself for an hour. So hopefully there's someone out there actually being able to hear me, but there was a lot there to unpack. All right. So that's from Coast to Coast AM. I told you that it was not going to be looking at things from a biblical or theological perspective. So the first thing we need to do, we do need to draw a distinction here, because I said some of this was based off the Gospel of Thomas. I should have been more specific there. There is the infancy gospel of Thomas, and then the gospel of Thomas. Do not confuse the two. So I did not specify. I just said the Gospel of Thomas, which was it was incorrect. The infancy Gospel of Thomas. I should have known better and made it more obvious of the distinction. So just make sure everyone understands this. There is the infancy Gospel of Thomas, and then there's the Gospel of Thomas. Do not confuse the two. So if you're referring to the infancy Gospel of Thomas, you have to say the infancy Gospel of Thomas. And if you're just referring to the Gospel of Thomas, you have to state the Gospel of Thomas. You've got to make sure, or you can confuse people, which I'm somewhat guilty of doing. So let me give you a little background on the infancy Gospel of Thomas. All right, there's some more there we're going to unpack, but let me give you some basic information here. All right. The infancy Gospel of Thomas is supposedly a biographical gospel about the childhood of Jesus, believed to date at the latest to the 2nd century. The infancy Gospel of Thomas was thought to be of Gnostic origin. Just keep that in mind. But those works are not referencing the infancy Gospel as many scholars has thought, but rather to a wholly different Gospel of Thomas. All right. So there's some people within church history who make some references, and they thought, and I guess there was some confusion thinking, oh, they're referencing the infancy Gospel of Thomas, but they were actually referencing the Gospel of Thomas. So even within history, there was a little bit of like, wait, who are they? Which one are they referencing? Are they referencing the infancy Gospel or the Gospel of Thomas? What are they referencing? And then because figuring out what they're referencing, then you can go, oh, here's possibly an early reference to this, and based off the people referencing it, oh, that's from that would possibly indicate it's from a Gnostic origin, and well, you can get into a whole discussion about that. All right. Proto-Orthodox Christians regarded the infancy Gospel of Thomas as inauthentic and heretical. So pretty early on, Christians rejected it. Eusebius rejected it as heretical fiction in the 3rd book of his 4th century church history, and a pope placed it in a list of heretical books in the 5th century. So there seemed to be a pretty universal condemnation of the book, of the infancy Gospel of Thomas as being inauthentic and heretical. Seems to be the case that's the way it works, the way it worked. The dating of the infancy Gospel, it seems that the first known quotation of the infancy Gospel of Thomas is from Irenaeus around AD 180, and even there he referred to it as being spurious and apocryphal. So even then, in 180, people were calling it into Christian. Some of the church fathers were calling it into question as spurious, apocryphal, inauthentic. So it just seems that most everyone has rejected throughout church history the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Scholars seem to agree on a date somewhere in the middle to late 2nd century. All right. Let's see here. So we got some difficulty of trying to figure out the date and the origin. There's a lot of dispute on the date and the origin. But besides the difficulty in its name being that the work is not related to the Gospel of Thomas. The work is not a gospel, but possibly, some think, an appendage to the Gospel of Luke, or a standalone work that has a dependent association to the canonical gospel text. The infancy story ends with Jesus in the temple at age 12, quoting parts of the Gospel of Luke. And then you can look at the section. So there's some disputes over its origin. There is some confusion over its name, infancy gospel. They're saying it shouldn't even be classified as a gospel. And because it's the infancy Gospel of Thomas, it gets confused with the Gospel of Thomas. Well, in this clip that we just heard, and on the program, Coast to Coast AM, and in the book, A New Vision of Jesus, a lot of their ideas and conclusions come from the infancy Gospel of Thomas. You need to understand that. Now, here's what's interesting. And you have to catch this. This is funny, all right? So, Many of the people who go down the path like this gentleman has gone down, and people who listen to Coast AM, always find it interesting. You can hand them the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and say, here you go. And they will say, well, I don't know if I can trust that. I don't know if I can trust that. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if that's accurate. And I believe the church may have manipulated the text and that people added this. And so they're very skeptical of the canonical Gospels, and they pick and choose what they like from it and then reject the things they don't like. Anything they don't like, oh, that was added by the church, or that just reflects the, misogyny and of the times, or whatever the case may be. But when it comes to something, say the infancy Gospel of Thomas, then it's accepted almost, oh, this is the truth. This, and almost as if there's no reason to doubt it. There's no reason to question it. It's the truth. It's the truth. And I just find that interesting. So the infancy Gospel of Thomas, it's almost like that's the way it was. That's accurate. The canonical Gospels, not so much. That probably just reflects the idea of the church. I find that to be somewhat interesting. So the canonical Gospels give us the resurrection of Jesus, right? A bodily resurrection. And that can be rejected. There are other things that Jesus said or did can be rejected. Jesus teaches on the subject of hell. Well, we don't really have to believe that's not the case. So what does he trust when it comes to what happens to wicked people? He trusts a book that he wrote with his dead wife, who I guess was communicating with him from beyond the grave, telling him what happens to the wicked. That he can trust. He cannot trust what the Bible teaches in regard. You see how that works? It's got to be, in one way, it's got to be so freeing to be, and whenever I listen to Coast AM, I often think of it from two perspectives. On one side, it's got to be so freeing that you can just basically believe anything you want. Right? You pick what you want to believe. You pick the sources that supposedly agree with what you believe, and you just kind of create, this is the way it is. And then that's truth. That's truth. That's got to be so freeing. But on the other hand, for the way my mind works, that at the same time would be so maddening. It would drive me insane because if you just stop to think about it, well, wait a minute, I claim this to be true. They claim that to be true. They claim that to be true. Where is truth? I would have to start second guessing. Well, how do I know what I believe to be true? Because I just picked what I wanted to be true. It's like, I don't know how you live a life where you claim to believe such big things. Like on Coast to Coast AM, massive claims about conspiracies and the existence of aliens and alien abductions. And they're always so dogmatic, like this is the way it is. And in some ways, it's like it's got to be freeing to just pursue any line of reasoning. But at some point, you would have to stop and go, well, wait a minute. Do I care about truth? And that you think they care about truth, but it's really just the truth they choose to believe based off whatever source they want to hold on to as being authoritative. So again, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, authoritative. Gnostic Gospels, or not Gnostic Gospels, I'm sorry. Canonical Gospels, not so much. Gnostic Gospels, maybe, right? So we could go to the Gospel of Thomas. That is, I don't know, it would be interesting. Since I haven't read the book, I'm almost positive. I could be wrong. Now, I was listening to this overnight. In that clip, they mentioned the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Maybe they did mention the Gospel of Thomas as well. Maybe they did. I'm not gonna give you any information. I had information on the Gospel of Thomas, but since I don't remember for sure what they said, I don't want to then insinuate that they quoted. In fact, let's do this. Now, again, I added the book to the Theology Central Book Club. So let me just do this. Let me see if they make any reference to the Gospel of Thomas in the advertisement for the book. All right, give me a second here. Here's the book club. Theology Central. Here's the book club. Let me click on the book. All right, here we go. Here's what we have here. All right, the name of the book is Jesus, A New Vision. All right, by Whitley Strieber. Here we go. I'm going to open up it's 271 pages long. And here's how they describe it. You ready? Whitley Strieber is a literary legend, and Jesus, A New Vision, is the most provocative book of his career. As the author of such influential books as War Day, Nature's End, Communion, and Superstorm, he ranks among the cultural forces of our time. Now, I can't say, those are big claims. He's a literary legend. I don't know how influential he is, but if he's influential at all and he's written a book about Jesus, then we need to at least address it and talk about it, all right? It says, Jesus, A New Vision, is at once a magisterial work of scholarship and a completely new approach to the meaning and message of Jesus. It comes at a time when the Western world is divided between a declining number of believers in Christian doctrine and an ever-increasing number of people who feel that Jesus was nothing more than a religious zealot who was executed for the crime of sedition. Wow, but even now, I just think it's interesting that this book is acknowledging a declining number of believers in Christian doctrine. So the world is taking note that more and more people are abandoning Christian doctrine. Now, I want you to see this. Just because the world is abandoning Christian doctrine doesn't mean people are going to stop talking about Jesus, believing in Jesus, or believing in spirituality. They're just going to form a new one. And again, this is going to happen outside the church. But remember, I think the fulfillment of biblical prophecy also includes it happening inside the church. There's going to be a new Christianity that emerges within the church and a new spirituality that emerges without. And both of them will probably talk about Jesus. I think that's something to consider as we move forward. All right, now, listen to what they say. So you got these two approaches, people leaving Christianity, and you got people who thinking Jesus was nothing more than a religious zealot who was executed for the crime of sedition. This book asks, what if neither of these approaches is right? What if Jesus really did perform miracles, including the resurrection, but that this says not that he was a deity, but that he was exercising human powers which are buried within us all and which we do not suspect are there? So the story of Jesus is not the story of God in the flesh, but the story of a person who tapped into powers that you and I possess right now. Talk about such a 2021 way of doing things. Let's take the story of Jesus and find a way to make it about us, okay? Turn it about. The church has been doing that for a very long time, all right? Let's continue. I think I was right here. Okay, so by exploring the life of Jesus and his teachings in an entirely new way, Jesus, A New Vision, sheds fresh light on the meaning and power of his parables, explores the mysteries of the Gospels of Thomas and Mary with fresh insight, and explains why, as Strieber puts it, he committed suicide by crucifixion. So when it says Gospels of Mary, of Thomas and Mary, are they saying the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary? Are they saying the infancy Gospel of Thomas? See, even right there, it's a little confusing. It's a little confusing. So I'm kind of glad that I started off by saying the Gospel of Thomas, because I wanted to emphasize, don't confuse the two. The infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Thomas. They are two separate things, and you need to know about them, all right? Because every time the world wants to talk about Jesus, they always run Gospel of Mary, this Gnostic gospel. They always run to these supposedly lost gospels. That's what they run to, and they basically treat them as inspired scripture that's trustworthy, while in many cases rejecting the canonical Gospels. It's just an interesting thing that you witness. They continue. It also addresses the questions that continue to surround the Shroud of Turin, exploring both the science that conclude that it was a medieval forgery and the more recent studies that have shown it to be something very different. It explores what happened after Jesus' death that led to the ultra-violence that destroyed the entire polytheistic culture of the Roman Empire, and explains why the greatest of all human revolutions happened, relating it to the pandemics and uncontrollable migrations that resulted from a climate change even that began around 150 AD and led to extraordinary disruptions that the Romans, knowing nothing of solar variability, blamed it on their gods. In its sweep and its drama, there has never been another book like Jesus, A New Vision. All right, so I mean, wow, they really hyped it up. I mean, they really hyped it up. I mean, they hyped that beyond. I mean, there's no way the book can obviously live up to it. I mean, they make it sound like it's the greatest book ever written on the subject in the history of humankind, and it's only 271 pages long. So clearly, there's not going to be a lot of depth there. But again, the name of the book, Jesus, A New Vision, and so there you have it, and I just think you should be aware of it. So let's do this. Infancy Gospel of Thomas. All right, I want to make sure you have that down. And then the Gospel of Thomas. Now, I'll just give you, let me see here. I think I have my notes here. Give me 1 second. I can probably find it really quick here. Let me see here. Maybe I can. All right. Yeah, I should be able to find it here really quick. All right, let me go here. Gospel of Thomas. Yeah, there it is. Gospel of Thomas. All right. Here's some. Now, this is separate from the infancy Gospel of Thomas. Right. I already gave you that background. So let me just give you a little bit of background here. Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas, completely preserved and papyrus Coptic manuscript, was discovered in 1945 in Egypt. It is a list of 114 sayings that are attributed to Jesus. Some of those sayings resemble those found in the four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but other sayings were unknown until its discovery. Unlike the four canonical Gospels, which employ narrative accounts of the life of Jesus, the Gospel of Thomas, this is separate from the infancy Gospel, takes a less structured form of collection of sayings attributed to Jesus and a brief dialogue with Jesus and some of his disciples reported to Didymus Judas, Thomas, without being embedded in any narratives nor worked into any philosophical or rhetorical context. All right. So there's just a list of sayings, Just keep that in mind. All right. When the complete text was found in a Coptic version, it was realized that 3 separate Greek portions of it had already been discovered in other parts of Egypt in 1898. The manuscripts bearing the Greek fragments of the Gospel of Thomas have been dated to about 200, and the manuscript of the Coptic version to about 340 AD. Although the Coptic version is not quite identical to any of the Greek fragments, it is believed that the Coptic version was translated from a prior Greek version. Because the Gospel of Thomas has a late date, this helps scholars to understand how it may have been written. A comparison shows a high probability of copying that took place between the writer of the Gospel of Thomas and the 4 canonical Gospels. It can be shown that a kind of mysticism has invaded the text, as well as the author's intent to use Thomas' name as a title in hopes that it would gain widespread acceptance. One of the most harmful sayings within the text are the last 2 verses. Let me give you the last 2 verses to show you why the Gospel of Thomas is obviously sometimes controversial. Here are the last 2 verses. Are you ready? And I quote, "His disciples said to him, 'When will the kingdom come?' Jesus said, 'It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, here it is, or there it is. Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it.'" All right, the last verse. "Simon Peter said to him, 'Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life.' Jesus said, 'I myself shall lead her in order to make her male.' so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, that you can imagine how controversial that is. All right, that is very controversial. So again, some people will reference it. That's the gospel of Thomas. All right, again, different from the infancy gospel. Both have been rejected. Both have major issues, but you need to be aware of both. It's one of those things. You need to be aware of it. And again, when people say, well, what about these other gospels? You've got to be able to say, okay, well, let's look at when they were written. What do we know about them? What manuscripts do we have? How did the early church respond to them? Why do you think they were rejected? And then if they say, well, I believe these are true, well, then why do you reject the canonical gospels? Why? Why are the canonical gospels wrong and these are right? When these have such a history of showing up much later, first showing up much later, and second, lots of issues with the early church saying, no, we reject these, we reject these, we reject these. And so the early church, closer to the time of Jesus, going, no, these things are problematic, but you all of a sudden can say now they're not problematic. You just need to be aware of it. And again, that's the kind of thing that airs, at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, coast to coast AM. You're sound asleep. You don't even know what's going on. And that's the kind of thing people are listening to and talking about. And then that kind of stuff gets shared on the internet. And then this book gets promoted, and you need to at least be aware of it. Right? There you go. It's called A New Vision of Jesus. It's now in the suggested section of the Theology Central Book Club, so you can have easy access to look at it. You can buy it if you want. It's up to you. You at least need to be aware of its contents. That's what I'm telling you to do. And again, if you want to be a part of the Theology Central Book Club, you can go to theologycentral.net, go to the blog section. It may take you a while to find the entry, but you'll find the blog post about the Theology Central Book Club. In that post, there's a link that will take you right to the book club. You can join. It's absolutely free. No obligation to buy anything. But anytime I'm up at 1 o'clock in the morning listening to some weird program and they talk about a book, I can just add it there and you'll get the notification and you can be like, what is he doing? Why is that book being suggested? And now you know, all right? And that's hopefully... I wish I could say something more profound. I guess probably the most important thing I've done here is make sure you know that there is a difference between the infancy gospel of Thomas and the gospel of Thomas. All right? I just want to make sure you definitely know that. All right? And that you know this book is out there. All right, if you have any questions or thoughts, email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right, thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.